Good day, class. For today, we will have another packet tracer activity entitled Implement VLANs and Trunking. Again, don't forget to change the user profile to your name and your email address. Right. Okay, so assigning a user profile would reset the activity. So as you can see in our topology, the communication among the switches are still converging. So we have an option to fast forward, but we'll just let the switches go on with their process as we change the size of the instructions to fit in our window, right? Okay, so in this activity, implement VLANs and trunking. Our objectives are first to configure the VLANs, and then part 2 we will assign ports to our VLANs, and then part 3 will configure static trunking, and lastly we will configure dynamic trunking. So looking back at our topology, we can see that all the status of the connections are already in green color, so which means the communication has already converged. Okay, so for this activity, we're given the addressing table for all the PCs. So we have 7 PCs in our topology. We have PC1 here, and then we also have, let me get my pointer. So we have PC1, which belongs to VLAN 10, PC2, which would belong to VLAN 20, and PC3 for VLAN 30. All of these are connected to switch B, while switch C contains PC4, 5, and 6, which are connected to VLAN 10, 20, and 30 respectively. And we have another one, PC7, which is assigned under VLAN 10 with an IP phone. So which means we have to enable a voice VLAN on the specific port of the switch. And of course, switch A connects switch B and switch C, right? So let's proceed with our instructions, and we begin with part 1, configure VLANs. Okay, so we will configure the VLANs on all the 3 switches, and let's refer to the VLAN table here. So we will create the VLANs and assign them with their VLAN names. So let's start with switch A first. Okay, so switch A, just put this on the side so we can still visibly see the VLAN table, right? So let's press enter, enable, and configure terminal, right? So let's create our VLANs with the command VLAN and then the number assigned. So we have VLAN 10, okay, and that is for the admin. So we assign a name, admin. Okay, let's continue with the rest of the VLANs. So we have 20 with the name accounts. Continuing to VLAN 30 with the name HR. VLAN 40 with the name voice. And VLAN 99 for management. And finally, VLAN 100 for the native VLAN, right? So we're done with switch A. We'll do the same for switches B and C. For switch B, Okay, so we're done with configuring our VLANs for all the three switches. So let's proceed to part 2, assign ports to VLANs. So we'll be assigning access ports to VLANs for step 1. So we'll do that for switches B and switch C. Okay, so going back to the topology, it's only switch B and switch C which are connected to our end devices or our PCs. So let's configure for switch B first. Okay, so we'll be assigning all the interfaces with their respective VLAN. So going back to the topology, switch B would be connected with its FA01's interface for VLAN 10, FA0/2 for VLAN 20, and FA03 for VLAN 30. So let's configure that to our switch B. Okay, by going to the specific interface, we'll start with F01 first. Okay, and then we assign it with switch port mode access. Right, since this is connected to an end device or our PC, so the mode of operation is access, and then we assign it to its respective VLAN. So this would belong to VLAN 10. So F0/1 is access connecting to VLAN 10. So again, F01 access to VLAN 10. Okay, so continuing, okay, let's go to F0/2. Okay, again, switch port mode is still access, but this time we'll assign it to VLAN 20. So I've used the command history to make it faster. So let's go to the next port, which is F0/3. Switch port mode is access. And then we'll have this assigned to VLAN 30. All right, looking at the topology, the previously configured are still converging, so it's still on process, but the first interface we had configured is already completed, so that's why we have a green there. So VLAN 20 is already okay, right? So we'll now go to the other switch, which is switch 3. Okay, so let's go to switch 3 for the configurations. Okay, so we'll do the same. So we'll go to interface F0/1. Okay, if we revisit, F0/1 is for VLAN 10, 0/2 is VLAN 20, 0/3 is for VLAN 30, and another one is added, 0/4 for also VLAN 10. All right, so we have an additional interface to be configured for switch C. So we'll start with the first interface, F0/1. So our switch port mode is access, and then we assign the access to VLAN 10, right? And then we will go to the next interface. So that's F02. Assign the mode of access and assign it to VLAN 20. Right. Next would be F03 access, and then assign it to VLAN 30. Right. And then lastly, we'll have interface F04. Right. So F04, assign it as a mode, access mode. And then of course, we'll assign it to VLAN 10. Right, from the figure, F04 should have a communication for VLAN 10, to cover for VLAN 10. So let's press enter. And we're done with the configuration for switches B and switches C. So let's go back to the instruction. We're done with step 1. And next to do is configure the voice VLAN port. Okay. So where is the voice VLAN port? So it's actually here at F04. All right. So we will add a voice VLAN configuration for F04. So let's go back to the same switch, switch C, and we'll have the same interface, F0/4. This time, instead of assigning it as a switch port mode access, we will configure it for voice VLAN. So as we used or as discussed on our lesson, we should issue the command MLS for multi-layer switching, and then QoS, quality of service, the keyword trust, and COS. Okay, COS, which stands for class of service. So as discussed on our lecture, for a voice VLAN, this should be the command that we should issue. MLS space QoS space trust space COS. And then, of course, we'll assign it to its VLAN assignment. So we'll have the switch port. Instead of having it as an access, we'll have it as voice. And then the VLAN assignment, which is, what is the VLAN assignment for our voice? It is 40, right? So VLAN 40, and then press enter, right? Okay, so we'll see that FA04 both works for VLAN 10 and a voice VLAN 40, right? Okay, so let's proceed to the next step. We're done with step 2. Step 3 is configure the virtual management interfaces. So we will create the virtual management interfaces on all the 3 switches by assigning the IP address seen on the address table. And then the switches should then be able to ping each other. Okay, so ideally, a switch, when connected with end devices, they can actually perform their operation of forwarding, but we cannot ping, okay, or we cannot remotely access it if we don't assign an IP address, okay, for the management. So we will do that, okay, recalling, okay, browsing to the addressing table. Switch 1 should have the following management configurations. These are the IP addresses and the subnet mask, and to the VLAN where they should belong. So VLAN 99, okay, VLAN 99 is what we had assigned for the management VLAN. All right, so we will do for all the switches. Okay, so let's start with switch 1 first. Okay, so we again enable config terminal, and then we go to the interface. So interface VLAN 99. We've already created the VLAN 99 a while ago, right? And then we continue typing in with IP address. So this is the IP address assigned for the switch virtual interface for switch A. So the address should be 192.168.99.252. So 192.168.99.252 with a subnet of 2/24. So 255.255.255.0, right? Again, IP address 192.168.99.252, and then the subnet mask. And then press enter, and don't forget to no shot to enable the interface. Okay, so let's do for the next 2 switches, switch B and switch C. Okay, so we had configured the management VLANs for all three switches, and we'll now proceed to part 3, which is configuring the static trunking. So going back again to the topology. Okay, so for the topology, we had configured the IP addresses for the management of all the switches, switch A, switch B, and switch C. So now we wanted to configure the trunking operation between switch A and switch B, and between switch A and switch C. So that would be our part 3 in the instruction. So configure static trunking at letter A. We should configure the link between switch A and switch B as static trunk. Okay, and disable dynamic trunking on this part. So for switch A and switch B, we will configure static trunk, and we know that by default, dynamic trunking protocol is enabled for us for Cisco devices. So we will issue a command to letter B step. We have to disable DTP on both ends of the trunk link. And then letter C, finally, we will configure the trunk with the native VLAN and eliminate the native VLAN conflicts if there would be. All right, so let's now configure static trunking. We first begin with switch A. Okay, so switch A, by the way, what interfaces are we connected with this trunk? Switch A is connected to interface G0/1 and also for switch B. So that is where we will configure the trunking mode. All right, so let's just exit and go to interface G0/1. Okay, so once we're into interface G0/1, we now assign the switch port mode trunk because we wanted this to work as a trunk mode, and yeah, the state is now changed to up state, right? So we will also disable DTP. So the command to disable DTP is, for the switch port, we have to issue the no negotiate command. Switch port space no negotiate. So and then press enter. And then of course, we do not forget to assign it to native VLAN 100, right? So switch port, okay, switch port trunk, native VLAN 100, right? So, and then press enter. Switch port trunk, native one, right? Okay, so we're done with switch A. So now let's go to switch B. So we also should set up the interface of switch B connecting to switch A as a trunk too. Okay, so, ayan. Okay, so we have received on switch B, okay, we have received an error actually telling us that there is a native VLAN mismatch. It's because for switch A, we configured the VLAN at 100. And since we have not configured for switch B yet, so there is a conflict. So currently the default is 1. Okay, so we have to configure it 2 to 100, so they would match. Okay, so for switch B, we go to interface G0/1 and then switch mode trunk. Okay, so switch port mode trunk, right? Ayan, so there are already activities which changing our port to up. Okay, and then let's continue with the required configuration. So we need to issue a no negotiate command too. Okay, so nasa na ako. So let me just press enter. So we'll have switch port no negotiate. Okay, and then press enter. And then finally, we'll have switch port trunk native VLAN 100. Okay, so DTP has been disabled and the trunk is working on native VLAN 100. Right, so we're done with yan. So port consistency already restored. So we now have a compatible VLAN assignments, native VLAN assignments. Okay, so going back to the instruction, if you notice, the progress now is at 91% because we're left with one part, which is configure dynamic trunking. So here, we will assume that the trunk port on switch C is set to the default DTP mode. So we will not disable DTP between switch A and switch C. Configure G02 on switch A so that it successfully negotiates trunking with switch C, and then letter B, configure the trunk with the native VLAN and eliminate native VLAN conflicts if any. All right, so let's look at the port topology. Between switch A and switch C, this would still make use of the DTP. For switch A and switch B trunk, we had disabled it. For this two, switch A and switch C, will have it retained working, but we will also assign it as a trunk and on native VLAN 100, right? So again, we'll configure the interfaces for the two switches. So this time for switch A, the interface is G0/2. Switch C is also configured with that interface. Okay, so let's start with switch A. Okay, we go to interface G0/2. All right, and we need to assign the switch port mode to trunk. All right. Right, and then of course we have to assign it with any of the modes of operation. So we'll use switch port mode dynamic desirable, okay, because we wanted to use DTP, dynamic trunking protocol. So switch A is configured to have the mode desirable, okay. And then, of course, we have to assign it with the native VLAN. Switch port trunk, native VLAN 100, right? So press enter. That's for switch A. For switch C po, okay, so let me just check on the progress. We are at 97% already. So we'll go to interface G0/2 and we'll also configure the mode to trunk, okay, switch port mode trunk. And since we are using the DTP function, no need to change this, okay. And we will not anymore set the mode of operation for the DTP, and we go straight to assigning the trunk to the appropriate VLAN. So as you can see, VLAN mismatch has been detected. So we'll try to correct that with our next command, switch port trunk native VLAN 100, so that we'll have the VLAN assignments matching for both the interfaces of switch A and switch C. So, yeah. Okay, so after completing part 4, we can see that we now have a 100% completion on our instruction. Okay, and our topology is actually, yeah, fully working already. So we have assigned the VLAN, we have created the VLAN, assigned the specific interfaces, okay, and then configure the trunk among the switches. Okay, and that's it. We're done with our activity entitled Implement VLANs and Trunking.